But yeah, so basically, I had no clue that this was free. I didn't know that you could renew your Part 107 for free, and in a fairly easy process as well. I figured that a lot of people out there want to know just how is the process, how hard it is it free, is it not free? And the great news right up front, it's free, and you can do it yourself right now through the actual FAAsafety.gov website. The first quote unquote lesson is basically the training overview of what are you going to go through, and then the summary basically kind of summarizes the whole entire overview. Obviously, the overview doesn't have a test, so it doesn't really matter, but just disclaimer, I plan to read every single thing on here. This is a full process video, so feel free to like put me at 2x speed or whatever kind of suits you to be able to inform yourself. But basically, yeah, in this first training overview that I just went through, it basically it defined the audience and the scope of the training. It identified the requirements to maintain currency for a Part 107 remote pilot certificate with an sUAS rating, described the structure of the training as a whole. The next module describes the Part 107 requirements for sUAS aircraft and the remote piloting command. And as I've seen, just as again a little summary, really, it seems like it's divided in the drone operation, as in like marking the drone and kind of identifying the drone, as I'm guessing if you're in this video, you've already had your Part 107 before. So it basically just kind of refreshes a few things that covers like piloting command, and like the markings of the drone, etc. But anyway, the next one here. It's a video.
This module focuses on certification requirements and other responsibilities related to the aircraft and remote pilot in command. You must satisfy all such requirements before operating small unmanned aircraft systems in the National Airspace System as a remote pilot in command. This lesson focuses on the aircraft itself. The lesson defines the characteristics of small unmanned aircraft systems as stipulated in Part 107. The lesson then identifies exclusions from the requirements in Part 107 for certain equipment or operating conditions.
Okay.
The lesson examines the requirements for registering small unmanned aircraft systems with the FAA, displaying appropriate registration markings per 14 CFR Parts 47 or 48, and ensuring that the aircraft is in condition for safe operation.
Okay, so this basically kind of like what I just said. This module focuses on certification and other requirements related to the aircraft and remote piloting command. As a remote piloting command, you must satisfy these requirements before operating an sUAS. Every time that I see PIC, I'm probably going to say piloting command, but every time that I see sUAS, I'm probably just going to say drone, just to kind of make it kind of more fluent. sUAS for me doesn't really roll off my tongue, and a lot of people don't know what that means. Obviously, this for the people that don't remember, I actually forgot at some point, but this just means small unmanned aircraft systems. But again, I'm just gonna call it drone. This lesson focuses on the aircraft itself and describes the characteristics of a drone. Part 107 exclusions and requirements for registration, markings, and conditions. Small unmanned aircraft systems. 14 CFR Part 107 applies to the operation of certain civil small unmanned aircraft within the NAS or national airspace. Except for certain excluded aircraft operations, any aircraft that meets the criteria below is considered a small unmanned aircraft. Some unmanned a small unmanned aircraft is, or basically weighs less than 55 pounds, which 55 pounds is a chunker, including everything that it's on board or otherwise attached to the aircraft. So basically, when the drone is ready to take off, perfectly with everything attached, and it weighs less than 55 pounds, is considered a small unmanned aircraft. And also, a small unmanned aircraft is operated without the possibility of direct human intervention from within or on the aircraft. So basically, nobody's up there controlling it. People on the ground are controlling it. A small unmanned aircraft system includes the unmanned aircraft itself and its associated elements that are required for safe operations, such as communication links and components that control the aircraft. Not all small unmanned aircraft are subject to 14 CFR Part 107, and the exclusions are described on the next page. Part 107 exclusions, 14 CFR 107, Part 107 does not apply to the following items or operations. Limited recreational operations, so if you're using it for recreational purposes, right, as long as they are in accordance with 49 USC 44809, Google it. Amateur rockets, of course, like the picture right here. Moored balloons, wait, hold on. Moored balloons. What the heck is that? Moored balloons, also called tethered. Okay, yeah, I know what that is. Sweet. Kites, operations conducted outside of the United States, public aircraft operations, and air carrier operations. And then there's an asterisk right here for this one. There's a note. An operator or government entity conducting a PAO, or public aircraft operation, has the option to operate wholly under Part 107 if all the Part 107 requirements are met. Those, I have never had to deal with PAO, so I'm not entirely super knowledgeable about it. But every time that I see PAO, I also see the words government entity or government personnel. So I'm neither of those, so I haven't really paid attention to that one. I apologize. Registration of the drone, sUAS. All drone operating under Part 107 must be registered with the FAA prior to operating in the NAS. The owner must satisfy the registration requirements described in 14 CFR Part 47, aircraft registration, or Part 48, registration and marking requirements for small unmanned aircraft when operating under 14 CFR Part 107. If the owner is less than 13 years of age, and if he's less than 13, then the small unmanned aircraft must be registered by a person who is at least 13 years of age. 14 CFR Part 48 establishes the streamlined online registration option for an sUAS that will be operated only within the territorial limits of the United States. And then it talks about, the resources here available. Visit the resources pages for the training to access this stuff right here. Now, I'm guessing if you are outside of the United States, I guess this really is the main thing that applies to you. And it's a foreign aircraft permit requirements. A drone operation, an sUAS operation requires a foreign aircraft permit if it involves a civil aircraft that is either registered in a foreign country or is owned, controlled, or operated by someone who is not a U.S. citizen. I was actually searching about this recently. Actually, let me keep reading. If either criteria is met, the remote PIC should obtain a foreign aircraft permit pursuant to 14 CFR 375.41 before conducting any operations. Application instructions are specified right there. Navigation of foreign civil aircraft within the United States. Submit the application by electronic mail to Department of Transportation, Office of Interview, and all those places. Visit the resources page for this training right there. There's a note. Operations over people involved in foreign-owned UAS have additional requirements. For more information, review AC 107-2, sUAS as amended, Chapter 5. So the thing here, I'm not sure. So I had a specific situation. I'm a real estate photographer, and I do a lot of drone work daily for real estate. And I had a question or a situation recently where I was operating as the pilot in command with an unlicensed actual operator, and I'm right next to him. I'm ready to take over. I'm visually, I'm fully compliant. And the question, this wasn't the case that we were going through, but the question was if the person operating the drone, not the pilot in command, if the person operating the drone is not a U.S. citizen, what happens, right? This specifically speaks right here in front of us for the pilot in command being the non-U.S. citizen or non-permanent resident, but I'm not sure if you mix and match. You know what I mean? I'm not sure about that. And then down at the bottom, specifically, where was it that I read it? So down here it says operations over people involving foreign-owned UAS have additional requirements. So if the owner is not a U.S. citizen, but I am a licensed pilot in command, or a pilot in command is just like the owner. I'm not sure. I'm not sure about those little discrepancies, I guess, or I'm not sure about those details. Registration marks. Before operation, mark the sUAS to identify that it is registered with the FAA. The registration markings must be a unique identifier number assigned by the FAA. This is typically the registration number or N number. Legible and durable. Sample methods include engraving, permanent markers, or self-adhesive label. I actually took a trick that I saw for another use, but I took a piece of tape, like really good tape. I got like some tape that's like tough that you can like put like frames on the wall with. But basically I put a piece of tape down, and then with a Sharpie, I put my FAA number, and then I put another 2 pieces of tape on top of that. And then basically kind of made it weatherproof, and it has been like that for 3 years now. And it's fine. So just throwing an idea out there. Cheap, easy. Most of you have tape. Doesn't ruin the drone. Doesn't, like, if you touch it, a lot of times permanent marker, if you touch it a lot, it kind of smudges. And I fly 3 batteries a day, so I needed something that doesn't smudge. All right, and it's also, the markings have to be visible on an external surface of the aircraft. The basically us, the owners, are no longer permitted to enclose the registration number in a compartment. We used to be able to put it like inside of the battery door or something like that. But I have literally on top of the drone, as big as it takes, literally from the entire top of the drone with marker with mine. And then it gives you some resources down here. Condition for safe operation. The remote pilot in command must maintain and inspect the sUAS prior to each flight to ensure that it is in a condition for safe operation. For example, inspect all components of the sUAS for equipment damage or malfunctions in accordance to the manufacturer's guidance. For more information about maintenance flights, maintenance and pre-flight inspection is provided later in this training. Quick thing. I didn't really, like, initially, I didn't have a pre-flight checklist. I was kind of like, just a noob, basically. I was brand new. I was really not, I didn't have the fear and respect that I should have had. And I had, what I'm guessing, it was a nicked propeller or something, but I was shooting $1 million house with the owner, with the broker, with my boss, everybody there, and in the middle, in front of everybody, the drone just lost control and smashed into a tree. Thankfully, it didn't cause any damage, and to my knowledge, that drone is still up there on that tree. But ever since then, I make a thorough check of every single propeller, every flight at a minimum. And of course, just a general check to see if there's cracks on the drone. That's the main 2 things, like the propellers being pristine, intact, and just random cracks on the arms of the drone. Oh, and we have a quest. To assess your understanding of the sUAS characteristics and requirements, review the scenario below. All right, scenario number 1. You're operating a 1,280 gram, 2.8 pound quadcopter for your own enjoyment. Just chilling for your own enjoyment. Is this UAS operation subject to 14 CFR Part 107? I'm going to give you 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. The answer is no. that does not need, and again, for your enjoyment really is the keywords there. You have accepted football tickets in exchange for using your sUAS to videotape the field before and after the game. Is this sUAS operation subject to 14 CFR Part 107, 54321? You should know this already. If you're accepting anything, not only that, technically charity. If you're doing charity, but you're doing something official and that footage is going to be used officially, that's a dicey scenario. I would say yes in that scenario as well, but this is definitely a yes. Scenario number 3, you plan to operate a 33-pound chunker sUAS to capture aerial imaging over real estate for use in a sales listing. Is this sUAS operation subject to 14 CFR Part 107? If I get this one wrong, I'm fired from my job. Definitely need one for this one for real estate listings. Sweet. This lesson examining the requirements for sUAS registration, markings, and condition. In summary, Part 107 applies to certain civil small unmanned aircraft operations conducted within the national airspace for purposes other than recreational purposes. That's the key. If you're not simply only entertaining yourself with the drone, you need a Part 107. A very typical scenario, the neighbor lost their dog. Hey, you have a drone. Can you put the drone up there to check to see if you can find my dog? Technically, that's 107. I'll let you fight in the comments. Let me know if you think this is 107 or not. Anyway, by now you should be able to define a drone. What's a drone? Which is, the key is less than 55 pounds at takeoff weight. Identifying exclusions from the requirement of Part 107, and identify the requirements for drone registration, markings, and condition. The next lesson examines the responsibilities of the pilot in command. Let's go.
In the previous lesson, you learned the characteristics of small unmanned aircraft systems and the requirements for registration, markings, and condition prior to flight. This lesson defines the role of the remote pilot in command. The lesson then identifies 2 crew roles that may support small unmanned aircraft system operations: a person manipulating the controls and a visual observer. The lesson examines best practices for crew resource management to ensure the safety of small unmanned aircraft system operations.
So this basically covers all 3 roles. The pilot in command, in supporting crew covers the visual observers and the actual person operating the actual sUAS. An sUAS operation may involve one individual or a team of crew members. Part 107 defines the following sUAS as crew roles. The remote pilot in command, a person who holds a current remote pilot certificate with an sUAS rating and has the final authority and responsibility for the operation and safety of the sUAS. The person manipulating the controls is a person controlling the sUAS under direct supervision of the remote pilot in command. And the visual observer, which is a person the remote pilot in command designates as a flight crew member to help see and avoid air traffic or other objects in the sky, overhead, or on the ground. This section of the lesson examines each of these roles and describes best practices for crew resource management. Pretty self-explanatory there. Remote pilot in command. The remote pilot in command is directly responsible for and is the final authority as to the operation of the sUAS conducted under 14 CFR Part 107. He or she must be designated before each flight, even though this can change during the flight. Ensure that the operation possesses no undue hazard to people, aircraft, or property in the event of a loss or control of the aircraft for any reason. That wording is super important, and I'm actually kind of surprised that they used the word undue. In my opinion, it should say possesses no hazard to people. But somehow that word undue is there. Remember, a lot of this stuff, this is official wording from the FAA and gets used in court cases. So I'm surprised about that. And also, you have to ensure that it complies with all the applicable regulations of Part 107. Also, the pilot in command must operate the small unmanned aircraft to ensure compliance with all applicable provisions. Part 107 permits transfer of controls of the sUAS between 2 or more certificated remote PICs. The transfer of aircraft control, the remote PIC designation, to each other must be accomplished while maintaining visual line of sight of the sUAS and without loss of control. So this specifically is talking about this this first one up here, be designated before each flight. So the Part 107 allows you, as if you are the pilot in command, then you can have two or more people, as long as they have certificates to be there, to basically transfer their remote pilot in command. This often is confused by the operation of the actual drone. The person that is operating the drone is allowed to not have a certificate, as long as it's in direct supervision of a PIC, of a remote pilot in command. Now, if I am relaying the pilot in command position, that other person has to be certificated. Supporting crew roles, person manipulating the controls. This guy doesn't have to. See, a non-certificated person may operate the sUAS under Part 107 only if he or she is directly supervised by a remote pilot in command, and the remote pilot in command has the ability to immediately take direct control of the sUAS. So again, just like I was explaining a second ago, I had somebody directly next to me operating the drone while I'm directing what I wanted to happen, while I'm being also the visual observer. And but if something is about to happen, I could literally just in less than 1 second have that control of the drone. The remote pilot in command is ultimately responsible for identifying hazardous conditions. The remote pilot in command's ability to regain control of the sUAS is necessary to ensure that he or she can quickly intervene to ensure the safety of the flight and prevent a hazardous situation before an accident or incident occurs. Sample methods to regain control. The ability for a remote pilot in command to immediately take control over the flight controls may be achieved by using a number of different methods. For example, the PIC can stand close enough to physically take control. Use a buddy box, which is basically you have a control, he has a control. That way you can override his controls. I don't think any DJI has that. In my world of work, they're all DJIs. So basically we have to do number one. And then it says here that you can also use a pre-programmed safe mode system with home or hover functions. Again, most of the drones that I hang out with don't have that. So just option number one is the only one I got. And then the visual observer. The role of the visual observer is to alert the rest of the crew about potential hazards during operations involving an sUAS. The use of visual observers is optional. However, the remote pilot in command may use one or more visual observers to supplement situational awareness and visual line of sight responsibilities while the remote pilot in command is momentarily conducting other mission critical duties, such as, checking your screen. In theory, if you're looking at your screen, at any point during your flight, you're supposed to have a visual observer. Again, fight me in the comments. The remote pilot in command may not space out visual observers to extend beyond visual line of sight. Let me say that again for the people back there in the back. The remote PIC may not space out visual observers to extend beyond visual line of sight. The amount of times I've heard this in this industry is insane, and I'm loving it that they have it here in bold. I try to highlight it, but you can't use that stuff on this page. I just saw a YouTube video of a guy that was testing an Avatar 2, DJI Avatar 2, testing how far can you go before it just dies or whatever. And what he did is that he spaced out a bunch of visual observers in a line where the drone at any given point is in visual line of sight of at least one of them. And that's incorrect. Let me see if it says it right here. The remote pilot in command must make certain that all the visual observers are positioned in a location where they are able to see the sUAS continuously and sufficiently to maintain visual line of sight, and possesses the means to effectively communicate the sUAS position. So if they're in a position where they can't easily tell you that something is about to happen. Then they have to be on radio, they have to be on the phone, they have to be able to effectively communicate. But yeah, right here, if we join these two sentences, right, the remote piloting command must make certain that all visual observers are positioned in a location where they are able to see the sUAS continuously. So every visual observer has to be able to see the drone at the exact same time. I'm hoping that makes sense, because that's super important for those type of big operations. Situational awareness and decision making. The remote piloting command attains situational awareness by obtaining as much information as possible prior to a flight and becoming familiar with the performance capabilities of the sUAS, weather conditions surrounding airspace, and air traffic control requirements. Sources of information include weather briefings, ATC, FAA, local pilots, and landowners. Technology such as GPS, computer applications can assist in collecting and managing information to improve your situational awareness and risk-based aeronautical decision making. For more information, those are your resources right there. Crew resource management is the effective use of all available resources, human, hardware, and information prior to and during flight to ensure a successful outcome of the operation. The remote piloting command must integrate crew resource management techniques into all phases of the sUAS operation. Many of the crew resource management techniques traditionally used in manned aircraft operations are also applicable for an sUAS, such as the ability to delegate operations, task, and manage crew members, recognize and address hazardous attitudes, and establish effective team communication procedures. This section of the lesson describes each topic in more detail on the next screens. And then those are your resources for more information on that. Task management. The remote piloting command identifies, delegates, and manages tasks for each sUAS operation. Tasks can vary greatly depending on the complexity of the sUAS operation. Supporting crew members can help accomplish those tasks and ensure the safety of flight. For example, visual observers and other ground crew members can provide valuable information about traffic, airspace, weather, equipment, and aircraft loading and performance. The remote piloting command assesses the operating environment, as in airspace, surrounding terrain, weather hazards, etc. Determines the appropriate number of crew members that are needed to safely conduct a given operation. The remote piloting command must ensure sufficient crew support so that no one on the team becomes overtasked, which increases the possibility of an incident or an accident, informs the participant of delegated tasks and set expectations, and also manages and supervises the crew to ensure that everyone completes their assigned tasks. Now, recognizing hazardous attitudes, I hope you guys remember this from like the original, like the OG original, the Part 107 certification, hazardous attitudes. Studies have identified 5 hazardous attitudes that can interfere with the ability to make sound decisions and properly exercise authority, which is anti-authority, impulsivity, invulnerability, machoism, and resignation. Each attitude is described in more detail on the next screen. Remote PICs should be alert for hazardous attitudes in themselves or other crew members, label it as hazardous, and correct that behavior. And then for more information, that's your resource right there. Alrighty, so I'm probably not going to read the entire indicator. Probably the motto and the antidote is really what matters here. But the attitudes are the anti-authority is basically don't tell me what to do. The antidote, follow the rules. They're usually right. A lot of FAA type of rules were literally written in blood, and it's just too much work to find out otherwise. Just follow the rules. You're fine. Impulsivity, do it quickly. No, don't rush any of these drone operations. Not so fans, think first. Invulnerability, it won't happen to me. That's what I was just explaining. I had a little bit of this hazardous attitude in regards to my pre-flight check. I didn't think it would happen to me. I was already 400 flights in. Like, well, it's not going to happen to me. Boom, it happened to me. It could happen to me. Machoism, I can do it. I'll show them. Again, it's when somebody tells you like, hey, you probably shouldn't fly. The weather is terrible right now. It's too windy, or the trees are too close. Like you're getting that advice, and then like it's up to you to take a proper decision. But that's a very thin line into, yeah, I got this, and that technically is machoism. And then resignation. What's the use? I'm not helpless. I can make a difference. A lot of people, I think, I don't know what's a good situation for this hazardous attitude, actually, resignation. If you know, let me know in the comments. What's a good situation that we can apply this resignation one to? All right, the next one is effective communication. The FAA requires that the remote piloting command and other crew members coordinate to scan the airspace and the operational area for any potential collision hazard, and maintain awareness of the position of the sUAS through direct visual observation. To achieve this goal, the remote piloting command should foster an environment where open communication is encouraged and expected between the entire crew to maximize team performance. Establish effective communication procedures prior to flight. So get those phones ready, get the radios ready, get the communication set. Select an appropriate method of communication among your team. That's what I just said. Inform the crew as conditions change about any needed adjustments to ensure a safe outcome of the operation. Quick nerd moment. I love weather. I've been into situations where the weather looked fine, the radar looked fine, all the apps said that everything was fine, but I felt the cold front. I saw all the signals that it was about to just change, and literally 10 seconds later it was storming on us. So it's very useful to really study weather, not just to kind of pass the test. Oh shoot, another quiz. Who is responsible for ensuring that there are enough crew members for a given sUAS operation? Remote piloting command, person manipulating the controls, or the visual observer? And the answer is obviously the remote piloting command. Whose sole task during an sUAS operation is to watch the sUAS and report potential hazards to the rest of the crew? The remote PIC, the person manipulating the controls, or the visual observer? The visual observer. Which crew member must hold a remote pilot certificate which crew member must hold a remote pilot certificate with an sUAS rating? The remote piloting command, the person manipulating the controls, or the visual observer? The remote piloting command. Who is ultimately responsible for preventing a hazardous situation before an accident occurs? Again, the remote piloting command. Which crew member is required to be under the direct supervision of the remote piloting command when operating an sUAS? That would be the person manipulating the controls, right? Which crew member is required to be under their supervision when operating? Yeah, that's that guy. This lesson described the remote PIC responsibilities during sUAS operation and best practices for crew resource management. In summary, the remote piloting command holds a remote pilot certificate with an sUAS rating. He or she is ultimately responsible for the safe operation of the sUAS. The remote piloting command designates, prepares, and closely supervises any individual serving as a supporting crew member, such as the person manipulating the controls or the visual observers. You should now be able to describe the role of a remote PIC, define possible supporting crew roles in an operation, and describe best practices for crew resource management. And then the next module examines rules for the safe operation of an sUAS. Let's go. 33
The previous
pages.
modules describe the application process for a Part 107 remote pilot certificate with a small unmanned aircraft system rating, small unmanned aircraft system characteristics and registration requirements, and crew roles. This module describes operating rules for small unmanned aircraft systems operating in the National Airspace System. The remote pilot in command has the final authority and responsibility to maintain and inspect the unmanned aircraft before flight, safely operate during flight, recognize abnormal and emergency situations, and report certain accidents. This lesson focuses on pre-flight requirements. The lesson describes recommended maintenance and pre-flight inspection procedures, such as assessing the operating environment and weather conditions, verifying that the aircraft is in a condition for safe operation, and ensuring compliance with Part 89 remote identification operating requirements.
Okay, awesome. This lesson here, just as a summary, is gonna tell us recommended maintenance and pre-flight inspection requirements. Maintenance for an sUAS includes scheduled and unscheduled overhaul, repair, inspections, modifications, replacements, and system software upgrades for the unmanned aircraft itself and all components necessary for flight. That reminds me that my drone has an update I have to do tonight. The first section of the lesson examines maintenance requirements and best practices. Note, additional maintenance requirements for Category 4 operations over people are described in a later lesson. There's more lessons. Scheduled maintenance. Manufacturers may recommend a maintenance or replacement schedule for the unmanned aircraft and system components based on time in service limits and other factors. Follow all manufacturers' maintenance recommendations to achieve the longest and safest service life of the sUAS. If the sUAS or component manufacturer does not provide scheduled maintenance instructions, the FAA recommends that you develop your own scheduled maintenance protocol. For example, document any repairs, modifications, overhaul, or replacements of a system component resulting from a normal flight operation. Record the time in service for the component at the time of the maintenance procedure, and assesses these records over time to establish a reliable maintenance schedule for the sUAS and its components. Again, basically just make your own. See what breaks in the drone. Literally just Google what usually break in a drone if you're brand new at this. Again, if you're watching this video, I think you're not new, but if you're going through props like crazy, if you're going through a drone every month, just kind of make yourself a little checklist of like, check the props, make sure they're not cracked, make sure that little orange tip is not like falling off, make sure the screws are good, make sure that there's not a hairline crack right at the screw, and then make sure that there's no cracks on any of the legs, make sure the gimbal is working good. That's it. That's all you need to check. It takes you 30 seconds and it can save somebody's head. Sweet. Unscheduled maintenance. During the course of this pre-flight inspection, you may discover that an sUAS component requires some form of maintenance outside of the scheduled maintenance period. For example, an sUAS component may require servicing, such as lubrication, repair, modification, overhaul, or replacement as a result of a normal or abnormal flight operation. Or the sUAS manufacturer or component manufacturer may require an unscheduled system software update to correct the problem, which is basically DJI has those updates all the time. In the event such a condition is found, do not conduct flight operations until discrepancy is corrected. Performing maintenance. In some instances, the sUAS or component manufacturer may require certain maintenance tasks be performed by the manufacturer or by a person or facility specified by the manufacturer. It is highly recommended that the maintenance be performed in accordance to the manufacturer's instructions. However, if you decide to not to use the manufacturer or the personnel recommended by the manufacturer, and you're unable to perform the required maintenance yourself, you should solicit the expertise of maintenance personnel familiar with the specific sUAS and its components, and consider using certificated maintenance providers such as repair stations, holders of mechanic and repairman certificates, and persons working under the supervision of mechanic or repairman. It's so weird for me still to see persons. I would rather use people, but whatever. If you or the maintenance personnel are unable to repair, modify, or overhaul an sUAS or component back to its safe operational specification, then it is advisable to replace the sUAS or component with one that it is in condition for safe operation. Complete all the required maintenance before each flight, preferably in accordance to the manufacturer's instruction or in lieu of that within known industry best practices. Basically, take care of your drone. Which of the following source of information should you consult first when determining what maintenance should be performed on an sUAS or its components? Local pilot best practices, the Part 107, or the manufacturer's guidance? Got him. Conducting a pre-flight inspection. Before beginning a flight operation involving an sUAS, assess the operating environment. Inform any supporting crew member about the operation and their role. Inspect the sUAS to ensure that it is in condition for safe operations. Ensure compliance with the remote identification operating requirements. Make sure that your drone is identified. Maintain documents required in the event of an on-site FAA inspection. Now, in over 6,000 flights, I have not had an FAA inspection, but I do have my license. Is it right here? Yeah, I have it right here. And I typically also have like the printed certificate that I got when I got my license. And technically at the end of this, there will be something that you're supposed to print as well. I don't own a printer, so I have to send it to somebody to print. All right. Assessing the operating environment. Before an sUAS operation, assess the operating environment, considering risks to persons and property in the immediate vicinity, both on the surface and in the air. The assessment must include, but not limited to, local weather conditions, local airspace and any flight restrictions, the location of persons and property on the surface, and other ground hazards. This assessment is part of an overall safety risk assessment for flight. Identify mitigation steps for potential flight. Now, most of these flight restrictions and local airspace, you can do it through your app. There's usually an app that you get your LANC from. That's where you check those things. And then this is the sources for weather. Remote PICs must obtain weather information prior to flight. You can visit any of these websites to be able to get that information. You can pause it right here if you need it. Effects of weather on performance. Even though sUAS operations are often conducted at very low altitude, weather factors can greatly influence performance and safety of flight. Specifically, factors that affect sUAS performance and risk management include atmospheric pressure instability, wind currents, uneven surface heating, visibility, and cloud clearance. As with any flight, the remote pilot in command must check and consider the weather conditions prior to any operation, any sUAS flight. This section of the lesson describes the effects of weather on an aircraft performance. This should mainly be a review for you guys, right? But wind currents can affect sUAS performance and maneuverability during all phases of the flight. Be vigilant when operating an sUAS at low altitudes, in confined areas, near buildings or other man-made structures, and near natural obstructions such as mountains or bluffs or canyons. Consider the following effects of winds on performance. Obstructions on the ground affect the flow of the wind and create rapidly changing wind gusts and can be an unseen danger. The intensity of the turbulence associated with the ground obstructions depends on the size of the obstacle and the primary velocity of the wind. Even when operating in an open field, wind blowing against surrounding trees can create significantly low-level turbulence. High winds may make it difficult to maintain a geographical position in flight and may consume more battery power. This right here, I see it every single day, especially around this time of the year. I get about sometimes even half of my normal battery life because of wind conditions. Of course, obviously, the more the drone has to fly up there in the air against the wind, the less battery life it'll have. Operations near buildings. Remember that location conditions, geological features, and other anomalies can change the wind direction and speed close to the Earth's surface. For example, when operating close to a building, winds blowing against the building could cause strong updrafts that can result in ballooning or loss of position control. On the other hand, winds blowing over the building from the opposite side can cause significant downdrafts that can have dramatic sinking effect on an unmanned aircraft. Surface heat and convective currents. Different surfaces radiate heat in varying amounts. The resulting uneven heating of the air creates small areas of local circulation called convective currents. Convective currents can cause bumpy, turbulent air that can dramatically affect the remote PIC's ability to control the drone. For example, plowed grounds, rocks, sand, barren land, give off a large amount of heat and are likely to result in off-drafts. And water, trees, and other areas of vegetation tend to absorb and retain heat and are likely results in downdrafts. Another thing that I'm not sure if this is covered by this, but knowing your tree line. A lot of times, as long as you're within the tree line or under the tree line, the wind condition is in certain state, but it is very different above the tree line. And I have had plenty of times where immediately when my drone goes above the tree line, instantly starts drifting in against the wind. So just kind of, just keep that in mind. This is visibility in clouds. As in manned aircraft operations, good visibility and safe distance from clouds enhances the remote PIC's ability to see and avoid other aircraft. Similarly, good visibility and cloud clearance may be the only means for other aircraft to see and avoid the drone. The regulatory requirements for visibility and cloud clearance are discussed in a later module, but it should be noted here that adherence to the regulatory requirements in conjunction with good airmanship and effective scanning techniques can preclude in-flight collisions. Collision avoidance is an essential aspect to safe integration of an sUAS into the national airspace. And there's some resources right here for more info. Which of the following geographical features may create downdrafts that affect UAS performance? Rocks or sand, plowed grounds, or water and vegetation. So actually, both of these, rocks or sand, plowed and barren, we just read that these cause updrafts because the heat is coming up too fast. So, and then we read that water and trees absorb heat, creating downdrafts. Before any sUAS operation, at a minimum, ensure that all persons directly participating in the sUAS operation are informed about the operating conditions, the emergency procedures, the contingency procedures, roles and responsibilities of each person involved in the operation, and potential hazards. Before any, this is about the conditions of the aircraft. Before any sUAS operation, inspect the aircraft for equipment damage or malfunctions. For example, check for structural skin crackle, delamination, and so on and so forth. I'm going to let you, this is basically what I said earlier, just more examples. If you want to pause it and just check more examples, this is all yours. How often is the remote PIC required to inspect the sUAS to ensure that it is in conditions safe to operate? Annually, monthly, or before each flight? Before each flight. Complying with Part 89 remote identification requirements, the 14 CFR Part 89 requires the remote identification of unmanned aircraft systems. Part 89 remote ID requirements apply to any unmanned aircraft that is required to be registered under Part 47 or 48. This includes all unmanned aircrafts operated under Part 107 because 107.13 requires registration to operate under 107. Unmanned aircraft that weigh less than 0.55 pounds, which is the 249 grams, 250 grams, are accepted unless they're operating under the Part 107, in which case they must be registered regardless of weight. The Part 89 requirements have a compliance date of 30 months from the final rule effective date. I unfortunately don't have that date on me, but I believe right now, if you're watching right now, you are supposed to have remote ID on your drone. They're making it so that a lot of the drone makers can't even sell drones if they don't have the remote ID in certain models and in certain things. DJI is covering a lot of that. I have if your drone doesn't have the remote ID, there are modules that you can put on your drone that are fairly inexpensive. The last time that I crashed my drone, I lost my module and I just had to rebuy it. I think it was $40, $30. It's a little black box that you do have to register this box with the FAA because that ends up representing your drone, right? I have it velcroed on top of my drone. It never goes away. And that is mandatory at this point. Extremely important, especially if you're in restricted airspace. Part 89 operating requirements. Part 89 establishes operating requirements. However, it is not an operating rule. Part 89 operating requirements are in addition to the operating rules of the Part 107. After the compliance date, persons operating an unmanned aircraft must follow one of the three sets of operating requirements depending on the unmanned aircraft type. So there's the standard remote identification unmanned aircraft, new unmanned aircraft produced after the rule production compliance date, 18 months for rule effectiveness, are limited to visual line of sight. I think they're all actually, you have to be, they're all visual line of sight. But like this is like I mentioned a second ago, some of them will have already a remote ID like module inside of them. They were produced after the ruling. If not, like me, you can get a module for it, a remote ID broadcast module. And then for no remote ID, the unmanned aircraft that do not have remote ID, not standard and not equipped with a module, may only operate in FAA recognized identification areas or FRIAs and are limited to visual line of sight. In theory, none of this covers FPV drones. And if you're flying an FPV drone with the goggles, in theory, you always are supposed to have a visual observer. Again, fight me in the comments if you don't agree. Transponders and surveillance technology. Use of the following technology is prohibited under Part 107 unless authorized by the FAA. And this means ATC transponders, which is basically kind of like a module that is actually communicating with the ATC from your drone, and automatic dependent surveilling broadcast. Google that one. I have no clue what the heck that is. Registration and declaration of compliance prior to operating a standard remote ID unmanned aircraft or an unmanned aircraft with a remote ID broadcast module. The operator pilot must ensure and confirm that the unmanned aircraft serial number is listed on the FAA accepted declaration of compliance, and the registration for the unmanned aircraft has been updated to include the serial number of the standard UA or broadcast module. So that's what I said earlier. Once you get your module, if your drone doesn't have remote ID, you can get a little module, but this module has to be on your FAA website thing to be linked to your Part 107 and your drone. FAA website will provide a service where a person can look up their unmanned aerial serial number to confirm it's listed on the FAA accepted DOC. Visit the resources pages for training to access all that stuff. I'm going quicker because we still have 10 more pages and there's more modules. I thought this was going to be so much shorter. How much we have so far? It doesn't even say. Good, I don't want to know. Monitoring broadcast messages. The pilot must ensure that the unmanned aircraft or module is broadcasting the remote ID message from takeoff to shutdown. Pre-flight responsibilities. Broadcast modules are designed to perform a self-test when turned on. A person may not use a broadcast module that has failed the self-test. In-flight responsibilities. If the unmanned aircraft or broadcast module indicates that the equipment is not functioning properly while the UA is in flight, the pilot must land the UA as soon as practicable. I mean, this is pretty self-explanatory here. You need to use remote ID. When operated under Part 107, the unmanned aircraft that weighs less than 0.55 pounds must comply with the remote ID requirements. When operated under Part 107, yes. Which of the following unmanned aircraft may only operate in FAA recognized identification areas? We just read it. If it doesn't have any remote ID at all. Any UAV that does not have remote ID capability. So it's not an existing or home-built UAV that later was equipped with. So that here we have a broadcast module and here we have a standard remote module. So is that one. If the UA or remote ID broadcast module indicates that the equipment is not functioning properly while the UA is in flight, the remote pilot in command must land the UA as soon as practicable, transfer control, or immediately report. It's the first one. Benefits of record keeping. Careful record keeping can be highly beneficial for sUAS owners and operators. For example, record keeping provides essential safety support for commercial operators who may experience rapidly accumulated flight operational hours or cycle. Consider maintaining a hard copy or electronic logbook of all periodic inspections, maintenance, preventative maintenance, repairs, and alterations performed on the sUAS. Such records should include all components of the sUAS, including the drone itself, the control station, like the controller, that's what it means, launch and recovery equipment, if you have any like landing pads or like the little legs on the drone. The data link is equipped, the payload is secure, and any other components required to safely operate the drone. Equipment and facilities. You must make the sUAS available to the FAA for inspection or testing upon request. In addition, any person holding an FAA accepted declaration of compliance must, upon request, allow the FAA to inspect facilities, technical data, and any manufactured sUAS, and witness any tests necessary to determine compliance. Basically, if the FAA shows up to inspect, boy, you better be ready. Remote PIC documents. Remote PICs must have the following documents in their physical possession and readily accessible during all sUAS flight operations. The remote pilot certificate, the personal identification, and the aircraft registration. You must present these documents for inspection upon request from the FAA, from any federal, state, or local law enforcement officer, and any authorized representative of the NTSB or the TSA. That second one right there, any federal, state, or local law enforcement officer, this is just saying that you must give them your documents if they ask for them, right? That's not one of those cases where you don't own the air, bro. That has nothing to do with that. It is specifically for checking your credentials, and this has saved my ass before. I've been called the cops numerous times doing real estate, drone for real estate, and the fact that I had my my permission, the fact that I had my license, and the fact that I had my registration absolutely completely made me free instantly. You're free to go. I'm good. And the fact that I also showed my work order and my job and everything that I'm doing. Additional records. Verify before flight that all documents required to be presented to the FAA upon request are available at the ground control station. Basically, wherever you are with your controller, that's the ground control station. Such documentation might include physical or electronic copies of any necessary waiver, authorization, or exemption, other documentation related to the operation, proof of remote PIC knowledge recency, completion of certificate of this training, and the aircraft worthiness certificate for category 4 operations over people. I believe no drones right now as of the 8th of April of 2025. I believe no drones are out of the box compliant with category 4. But again, let me know in the comments if I'm wrong. Carriage of hazardous materials. Holy crap. Who's putting hazardous materials on a drone, bro? A small unmanned aircraft may not carry hazardous materials. I mean, okay, and then you can read here what that means. I know already. Carriage of lithium batteries. Actually, every drone has one. Lithium batteries that are installed on an sUAS for power during the operations are not considered a hazardous material under Part 107. However, spare, which is uninstalled, lithium batteries would meet the definition of hazardous material and may not be carried as cargo on the sUAS. Meaning, if you want to have one battery plugged in, which is operating the drone, and then you want to have another one for cargo for some reason, you're not allowed to do that, bro. Stop it right now. Summary. This lesson examined pre-flight requirements for an sUAS. In summary, the remote piloting command is responsible for maintenance and pre-flight inspection of the sUAS, safe loading techniques, and continuous assessment of the performance in flight. You should now be able to describe the recommended maintenance procedures for an sUAS, inspection requirements to verify that the sUAS is in a condition for safe operations. And then the next lesson examines operating rules for an sUAS.
The previous lesson examined pre-flight requirements for small unmanned aircraft system operations, including scheduled and unscheduled maintenance, pre-flight inspection procedures, and factors that could affect aircraft performance. This lesson focuses on rules for safe operation of small unmanned aircraft systems in the National Airspace System. The lesson describes operational requirements and limitations and available certificates of waiver for select requirements in 14 CFR, Part 107.
Awesome. Operating limitations for small... Oh my god, this is 65 screens. Let's go. Operating limitations for small unmanned aircraft. Small unmanned aircraft must be operated in accordance with the following limitations. Cannot be flown faster than a ground speed of 87 knots, which is 100 miles an hour. It cannot be flown higher than 400 feet above ground level unless flown within a 400-foot radius of a structure, and is not flown higher than 400 feet above the structure's immediate uppermost limit. So if you're shooting a really high building, you basically can go 400 feet above that building. Just make sure that you're not in other airspaces where you're not supposed to be while doing that. Visual line of sight. The small unmanned aircraft must remain within visual line of sight of flight crew members. It feels like a lot of you need to listen to this one. Visual line of sight means you are capable of seeing the aircraft without vision unaided, with vision unaided by any device other than corrective lenses, spectacle, or contact lenses. Further, it means to be able to see the unmanned aircraft in order to determine its location, altitude, attitude, and direction of flight. Observe the surrounding airspace and determine the unmanned aircraft does not endanger persons or property. The remote PIC and person manipulating the controls must be able to see the small unmanned aircraft at all times during the flight. Should I say it? Oh, no. We heard it. Did you guys hear it in the back? Okay, we good. This requirement also applies to the visual observer if used during the aircraft operation. Crew members must operate within the following limitations. Minimum visibility as observed from the location of control station must be no less than 3 statute miles, and minimum distance from the clouds must be no less than 500 feet below a cloud and 200 feet horizontally from a cloud. In places where cloud coverage sometimes gets really low, if your clouds are at 800 feet, and technically you're not supposed to be flying over 300 feet, right? Crew members must be able to see the small unmanned aircraft at all times during flight. Therefore, the small unmanned aircraft must be operated closely enough to the control station to ensure visibility requirements are met during small unmanned aircraft stations. I'm going to let you pause this real quick and take a screenshot and send this to the guy that keeps sending the drone 16 miles that way, because it's still in line of sight, bro. There's nothing in the way. Please show him this. Thank you. Restrictions on vision aids. Visual line of sight must be accomplished and maintained by unaided vision, except vision that is corrected by like eyeglasses or contact lenses. Vision aids such as binoculars may be only used momentarily to enhance situational awareness. For example, a remote piloting command, a person manipulating the controls, or the visual observer may use vision aids briefly to avoid flying over persons or to avoid conflicting with other aircraft. So it might still be visible, but you're not sure if it's about to like do something weird. You can use them briefly. The remote regaining visual line of sight. The remote piloting command or person manipulating the controls may have brief moments in which he or she is not looking directly or at or cannot see the small unmanned aircraft, but it still retains the capability to see it or quickly maneuver it back to line of sight. These moments should be for the safety of the operation, such as a briefly looking down at the control station or scanning the airspace. To scan for traffic, the crew should systematically focus on different segments of the sky for short intervals. And if for operational necessity, such as intentionally maneuvering the aircraft for a brief period behind an obstacle. There is no specific time interval for which interruptions of visual contact is permissible. Such parameters could potentially allow a hazardous interruption or prohibit a reasonable one. The remote piloting command or person manipulating the controls must attempt to regain visual line of sight immediately if he or she unintentionally loses line of sight of the aircraft, or as soon as practicable if he or she loses sight of the aircraft for operational necessity. Civil twilight and night operations. Operations in civil twilight or at night must meet additional requirements. Night is defined as in 14 CFR 1.1 as the time between the end of evening civil twilight and the beginning of morning civil twilight, as published in the Air Almanac and converted to local time. The Air Almanac provides tables to determine sunrise and sunsets at various latitudes. For example, the contiguous United States evening civil twilight is the period of sunset until 30 minutes after sunset, and morning civil twilight is the period of 30 minutes prior to sunrise until sunrise. Holy crap. In Alaska, the definition of civil twilight differs and is described in the Almanac. Just Google it, bro. Visit the resources page for this training to access the Naval Observatory website where you can download this stuff, and there's some more resources down here. Twilight and night operations, you need anti-collision lights. This is another one that a lot of people out there don't get. When conducting sUAS operations during civil twilights or at night, the sUAS must be equipped with anti-collision lights. That the small unmanned aircraft has lighted anti-collision lighting. Jesus Christ. The small unmanned aircraft has lighted anti-collision lighting visible for at least 3 statute miles that has a flash rate sufficient to avoid collision. And Amazon has tons of these. It's just little tiny strobes that are stupid bright. And by the way, those strobes go on top of your drone. It's for other aircrafts that are above your drone to see, not under your drone. Those strobes are not for other people to see. Just a quick note there. The remote pilot in command has the discretion to reduce the intensity of the lighting in the interest of operational safety. For example, the remote pilot in command may reduce the intensity if close proximity to bright or strobe lighting on the UAS interferes with the ability to observe the sUAS location, speed, altitude, or altitude with accuracy. That's why you put it on top, right? Like the strobe is not for us. The strobe is for people above the drone. Visual line of sight at night. The remote PIC must keep the sUAS within the intended area of the operation and within visual line of sight for the duration of the operation. For most, it seems. Oh, this is at night. Okay, never mind. For almost all operations at night, this means restricting the operational areas of the sUAS or using an sUAS with an additional system such as positional lighting. Reduced lighting and contrast at night make it difficult to visually discern location, attitude, altitude, and direction of the flight. The remote piloting command cannot rely solely on anti-collision lighting or GCS telemetry data displays, even in the combination of both. As a result, night operations are subject to reduced operational ranges. Challenges of night flight. Night flight involves risks that are not present during daylight operations. To operate a small UAS safely at night, implement protocols to mitigate the risk you identify for each operation. Challenges and mitigation strategies include circadian rhythm effects. Avoid self-imposed stressors that can limit night vision, including exhaustion, hypoglycemia, low blood sugar, tobacco use, etc. Obstacle avoidance with lack of visual cues. Survey the operational area before flight to identify possible obstacles and check for sources of ground lighting and ensure that the lights will not be turned on before and during the operation. And then night physiology and night illusions. Night vision considerations are described on the next screen. Holy crap. Night physiology and night illusions. The retina uses 2 photoreceptors to send visual signals to the brain. Cones near the center perceive fine details and colors. Rods on the edges help peripheral vision. When looking directly at an object, the image is focused mainly on the fovea, where details is best seen. Rods are the primary receptors for night vision. The concentration of cones in the fovea can make a night blind spot in the center of the field of vision. At night, sharpness, acuity, color, depth, perception, and judgment of size may be lost. Night illusions can cause confusion and distraction during night flights. The remote piloting command should look 5 degrees to 10 degrees off center of the sUAS to help compensate for the night blind spot. Avoid looking at bright lights after adapting to darkness. designate one or more visual observers, establish a night landing area, and immediately land the sUAS if you cannot determine its location relative to another aircraft. Training or testing. Effective March 16, 2021, in order to operate at night, you must have completed either the FAA knowledge test or this online training to contain the topics of night physiology and night visual illusions. The night blind spot occurs if in the center of your field of vision, only in your peripheral throughout the entire. Operation near aircraft, right-of-way rules. No person may operate a small unmanned aircraft in a manner that interferes with operations and traffic patterns at any airport, heliport, or seaplane base. The remote pilot in command has a responsibility to remain clear and yield right-of-way to all other aircrafts. There is zero situations where you have the right-of-way with your drone. Zero. To satisfy the responsibility, the pilot in command must know the location and flight path of his or her small unmanned aircraft at all times, be aware of other aircrafts, persons, and property in the vicinity of the operation area, and be able to maneuver the small unmanned aircraft to avoid a collision, prevent other aircraft from having to take evasive maneuvers, and yield right-of-way to all other aircraft, including aircraft operating on the surface of the airport. Avoid operating anywhere where the presence of his or her unmanned aircraft may interfere with the operations at the airport, such as approach corridors, taxiways, runways, or helipads. First-person view cameras cannot satisfy see and avoid requirements. However, such cameras can be used as long as the see and avoid requirement is satisfied in other ways. That's exactly what I said a few slides ago about the visual observer. If you have a FPV drone, if you have the goggles in, the main legal reason why you need a visual observer is because you cannot satisfy the see and avoid requirement. So then you need a visual observer for that. Operation in certain airspace. Many sUAS operations can be conducted in uncontrolled Class G airspace without further permission or authorization. However, operations require prior authorizations from air traffic control in Class B, C, and D airspace, and within the lateral boundaries of the surface area of Class E airspace designated for an airport. Remote piloting commands must be aware of the type of airspace in which they will operate their sUAS. Their remote piloting command should refer to the low altitude authorization and notification capability, which is LANC, the Before You Fly app, current aeronautical charts of the intended operating area, and other navigational tools to determine position and related airspace and aid decision making regarding operations in the national airspace. The easy way to remember that is Class G. G equals good. G, good. That's, you're good if it's G. But I actually use that LANC, low altitude authorization and notification capability. I use it every single day too, because my working area there's 3 airports. So I constantly have to be working with that. Now, this might be worth a screenshot and some studying. I remember that for some reason at the beginning, this kind of seemed a little daunting to me, but it's worth looking over. Anyway, I'm going to quickly read it. FAA rules apply to the entire national airspace system. There is no such thing as unregulated airspace. Remote piloting commands should be familiar with the difference between controlled and uncontrolled airspace and where you can legally operate your sUAS. Controlled airspace is found around some airports and at certain altitudes where air traffic controllers are actively communicating with, directing, and separating all air traffic. And other airspace is considered uncontrolled in the sense that air traffic controllers are not directing air traffic within its limits. In general, you can only fly your sUAS in controlled airspace below 400 feet above ground level. Remote PICs are required to get authorization from the FAA before flying sUAS in controlled airspace, and you do that through that Before You Fly app. I think it's right now on iOS, it's called Air Control. Just like search on the App Store Air Control, and you'll find it. Airport operations. The term airport refers to any area of land or water used or or intended for landing or takeoff of aircrafts, airport buildings or facilities, and right-of-ways. There are two types of airports. There is towered airports, which have an air traffic control directing the flow of traffic when the type of operations and or volume of traffic requires such a service, and non-towered, which is it just doesn't have one. And the best practices include for non-towered are monitoring other aircraft on the common traffic on CTAF, right? Common Traffic Advisory Frequency, identified in the aeronautical publications, and entering traffic patterns at pattern altitude, preferably by entering down from the downwind side on a course 45 degrees to downwind leg and joining the pattern at midfield. If you're flying a DJI drone, most times you won't. It would be a very. I don't want to say that this won't apply to you, but these are very, very special cases. Again, I've shot over 6,000 houses for real estate, and I haven't had to deal with this once. These types can be further subdivided to civil airports that are open to the general public. Military, federal government airports that are operated by the military, NASA, or other agencies of the federal government, and private airport designated for private or restricted use only, not open to the general public. The sources of navigational data. When planning each UAS flight, review most current data about the selected location from navigational references tools. I'm just going to read the bolded here because this is stuff that we learned when we got our Part 107. And again, you can kind of pause it if you want to read over it. But basically, the tools are the sectional aeronautical charts, the chart supplement, and the aeronautical chart the NOTAMs, right? The aeronautical chart bulletins and notices to airmen. Interpreting airspace terminal area chart example. These are, although this was fairly easy to do in the test, it's actually kind of hard to explain it, right? So I'm just gonna read over it, and if you want to pause it and kind of study it, that works as well. Remote piloting command must be able to identify the 5 classifications of airspace that apply to a UAS operation and the rules when operating in the national airspace system. Class B example, Dallas-Fort Worth. Class B is the most complex airspace in the national airspace system. For example, consider the first image of the Dallas-Fort Worth DFW Class B terminal chart area, which I believe is this one right here. It's a mess. This is literally, like it says here, the most complex airspace in the whole nation. Although it is called Class B chart, Class D, Class E, and Class G airspace also are here. They're literally every flavor is in there. Class D airspace, the second image below, and Class E airspace in the third image below, and Class G airspace also in the third image below. Again, you can if you want to pause this. Go ahead. There you go. Interpreting airspace sectional chart examples. It is always the responsibility of the remote piloting command to know where they are operating. In classes B, C, D, and E that is associated with an airport, the remote piloting command must have authorization from the FAA. Class C example, Norfolk. Consider the first image that shows the Class C airspace. Again, I'm going to let you pause this if you want to go over these. It's extremely rare that you're going to have to deal with this unless you're doing like the big boy jobs, like working around airports a lot, doing like the cell phone towers and those type of big jobs. Then you might have to touch this, but there's also applications and websites that make this a lot easier as well. NOTAMs, temporary flight restrictions or TFRs applied to sUAS operations. For that reason, it is necessary for the remote PIC to check the NOTAMs before each flight to determine if there are any applicable airspace restrictions. Common TFRs that relate to sUAS operations include but are not limited to presidential TFRs and NOTAMs, emergency responses, standing TFRs that go into and out of effect. For example, the stadium I live very close to Ann Arbor, the the stadium in Ann Arbor. There's a permanent TFR around it, and then it's up to me to know if I can fly or not. Operations in prohibited or restricted areas or areas designated in no terms. No person may operate a small unmanned aircraft in prohibited or restricted areas unless that person has permission from the using or controlling agency, as appropriate. Under Part 107, the pilot in command must comply with the following provisions. The provisions over here in 99, and I'm gonna let you pause this and read all these provisions if you need them. Obtaining airspace authorization. Do not contact the ATC facility directly for airspace authorization. Make applications through the FAA Drone Zone or LANC as appropriate. If your application LANC is telling you that you cannot fly, just literally Google FAA Drone Zone and it literally walks you through it. Now, it is imperative for people to know that right now, I literally just took a screenshot, literally not even like an hour or not even like 3-4 hours ago. It is right now they're asking for 60 days. If you're requesting for an operation that is happening before 60 days from the day that you're requesting, the little orange thing on the FAA says that it's more than likely not going to get approved. So it's a really tedious thing. And for me, for real estate, every time we're close to an airport or anywhere that I'm not allowed to fly, I just tell my agents, unfortunately, I cannot fly. And thankfully, in 6,000 houses, everybody have been fine with that. ATC has the authority to approve or deny aircraft operations based on the traffic density, controller workload, communication issues, or any other type of operations that could potentially impact the safe and expeditious flow of air traffic in the airspace. When ATC authorization is required, it must be requested and granted before any operations in that airspace. There is currently no established timeline for approval after ATC permission has been requested because the time required for approval will vary based on the resources available at the ATC facility and the complexity and safety issues raised by each specific request. For this reason, remote piloting command should request ATC authorization as soon as possible, as I said a second ago, prior to any operations in the Class B, C, or D airspace and within the lateral boundaries of the surface area of Class E airspace designated for an airport. And more information, you can go down here. Frequency spectrum. Most sUAS use radio frequencies to establish the data link between control stations and small unmanned aircraft. Considerations for radio frequencies used in sUAS operations include frequency interference and line of sight obstructions. This section of the lesson describes each topic in more detail. Many sUAS utilize the same unlicensed frequency bands for control and command and video links. These unlicensed radio frequency bands used during NSUAS operations are regulated by the FCC and may require FCC license. These same frequency bands are also commonly used for Wi-Fi and other remote wireless devices. Frequency congestion and interference may affect operations of the sUAS. Before conducting an sUAS operation, consult the manufacturer's operation manual to determine the frequencies for your specific sUAS. Most drones will have a setting for their signal so that you can select the best frequency and bands. Line of sight frequency and frequency obstructions. Radio frequency bands for sUAS depend upon direct line of sight to function properly. Be aware that the command and control link between the control stations and the small unmanned aircraft may not work properly when barriers are between the control station and the unmanned aircraft. Just watch on the top right, just watch your signal. Just make sure you're good. Spectrum authorizations. Radio transmissions, such as those used to control an unmanned aircraft and to download real-time video, must use frequency bands that are approved for use by the operating agency. Operations on licensed band frequencies require a user-specific license for civil users except federal agencies to be obtained from the FCC. And then there's some resources down here. Knowledge check. Holy crap. I skipped a bunch of stuff. I hope I'm good. Power company employees use an sUAS to inspect a long stretch of high voltage power lines. Due to muddy conditions, their vehicle must stay beside the road, and the crew uses binoculars to maintain visual line of sight of the aircraft. Not compliant. A company hires a UAS operator to film construction progress on a new headquarters building. The remote piloting command wants to capture sunrise footage and begins aerial photography about 15 minutes before sunrise. Most of the operation will be conducted after sunrise, though, so the sUAS is not equipped with the anti-collision position lights. I think that's compliant because it's 15 minutes, not 30, right? I'm going to read it again. A company hires a UAS operator to film construction progress on a new headquarters building. The remote PIC wants to capture sunrise footage and begins aerial photography about 15 minutes before sunrise. We learned earlier that it was 30 minutes, right? Most of the operation will be conducted after sunrise, though, so the UAS is not equipped for. I think it's compliant. I might be wrong on this one. Shit. The scenario is not compliant with Part 107. The operation falls within morning civil twilight. Okay. Now I understood that. Sweet. It's actually great to have a learning opportunity in the stream. I'm streaming this on Twitch as well. If I have people on Twitch right now, I am so sorry. I don't have the Twitch chat open because I'm focusing this as a YouTube thing. So I apologize. But yeah, it is not compliant. It is not compliant because it's during those 13. For some reason, the 15 minutes up there confused me. Okay, so our remote piloting command is operating sUAS at night to survey a structure using aerial thermal imagery. The sUAS is equipped with high visibility position and anti-collision lighting. Though the lighting would be visible for 3 statute miles, the remote piloting command has also greatly reduced the operational area of the sUAS for night maneuvers. Though the lighting would be visible for 3 statute miles, the remote piloting command has also greatly reduced the operational area for night maneuvers. Yeah, that's compliant, right? Yeah. The scenario is compliant with Part 107. The lighting and reduced operational range will help the remote piloting command keep the sUAS within visual line of sight and within the intended area of operation. Our remote piloting command is operating an sUAS at night. A nearby homeowner complains about the ultra bright LED strobes anti-collision lights. That's because he has them on the wrong place. The remote piloting command reduces the intensity of the lights to avoid a confrontation. Yeah, sure. Bullshit. Did we not read about that? Okay, let me see what I got wrong. This scenario is not compliant with 107. Anti-collision line must be visible for at least a mile from the control. The remote PIC may only reduce the intensity of the lighting in the interest of operational safety. Got it. Okay, another learning opportunity. So earlier I kind of generalized the fact that we could turn down the intensity, but I'm now reiterating and relearning the fact that it's only due to operational safety. So for example, if the strobe, you have it wrong on the bottom of the drone and that light is just not letting you see the drone, if somehow you can reduce the light from that position, you can do it. Section 107.39 prohibits operation of an sUAS over another person unless that person is directly involved in the operation, such as a visual observer or a crew member, or within a safe cover, such as inside a stationary vehicle or a protective structure that would protect the person from harm if the small unmanned aircraft were to crash into the structure. However, Part 107 does allow certain categories of operations over people. These categories are summarized on the next screen. So Part 107 allows the following limited categories to fly over people, which is Category 1. Operations are limited to sUAS within a maximum weight of 0.55 pounds, which is the 250 grams. Category 2 or 3 operations may only be conducted with small unmanned aircraft that fulfill performance-based standards that limit the likelihood and severity of injuries based on potential hazards. And then Category 4 operations are limited to sUAS with FAA-issued airworthiness certificates. Carefully review the Part 107 Performance-Based Standards and Advisory Circular 107.2 as amended guidance if you wish to conduct these categories of operations over people. I highly suggest Googling this. I am even like a little bit rusty on this. I'm actually going to read them one more time. So category 1 is the 250 grams. Category 2 is conducted with a drone that is that fulfill performance-based standards that limits the likelihood. So basically a drone that, I'm pretty sure drones that have like the propeller guards, that's what it means. It's just like reducing the likelihood of an injury. And then category 4 is that it already has an FAA issued airworthiness certificate. sUAS that weigh 250 grams or less to conduct Category 1 operations, a remote PIC must use a small unmanned aircraft that weighs 250 grams or less on takeoff and throughout the duration of each flight of each operation under this category, including everything that's on board on or otherwise attached to the aircraft. Before conducting Category 1 operations, the remote PIC must confirm that the aircraft and everything on board or attached meets their weight requirements by using a kitchen scale, for example. Category 1 operations do not require additional labelings or declaration of compliance. Rarely flying over people is a Category 1. It's usually Category 2 or 3. For 2 or 3 operations, the sUAS must meet all 3 of the following safety level criteria. Will not cause injury to a human being that is equivalent to or greater than the severity of the injury caused by a transfer of the designated foot-pound of kinetic energy specified below upon impact of a rigid object. So to put things in perspective, a Category 2, if your drone at free fall, and I don't necessarily know how we can know this, right? But if your drone at free fall is not transferring more than 11 foot-pounds of kinetic energy when it smacks somebody in the head, then it's a Category 2. If it's more than 11 but less than 25, then it's a Category 3, I'm understanding. And also does not contain any exposed rotating parts that could lacerate a human. Exactly. So prop guards, and does not contain any safety defects identified by the administrator. Additional requirements and restrictions. This is a long one. I'm so sorry, guys, but we're learning here. In addition to the safety level criteria described on the previous screen, Category 3 operations are subject to additional requirements and restrictions. Category 3 operations are allowed when the operation is conducted over a closed or restricted access site, when all persons accessing the site are on notice that the sUAS operations may take place within the site as long as the operation area is not considered an open air assembly, or the operation is not within a closed or restricted access site and the small unmanned aircraft does not sustain flight over any person who is not directly involved with the operation of the sUAS. So like, for example, in nightclubs where you see these videos of the FPV drones flying on nightclubs, in theory, technically everybody in that building should have been notified that there's going to be a drone that potentially might crack your head. Category 2, Declaration of Compliance. For Category 1 operations, the FAA does not require a declaration of compliance. For sUAS to be eligible for Category 2 or 3 operations, the person who produces, designs, or modifies the sUAS must submit a declaration of compliance to the FAA via an electronic form of the FAA, and I don't think DJI has done that for any of their Category 2s or 3s, if there's even any of them. Let me know in the comments if there's any DJI involved in this, that it's already compliant, right? The DOC involves certifications of 2 key considerations: means of compliance with the sUAS safety level criteria and procedures to record keeping and owner notification. Each consideration is described in more detail on the next screen. Really? Means of compliance. The DOC involves certification that the sUAS complies with the appropriate safety level for impact kinetic energy and exposed rotating part standards through the FAA accepted means of compliance. For example, I believe the Avatar 1, I haven't checked the Avatar 2, but the Avatar 1 I believe is not compliant, even though it has prop guards. I believe the I don't remember why. It was a while, but I remember that it wasn't. I have to Google it again. Means of compliance generally consists of 3 types summarized in the table below. So we got FAA provided means of compliance. We have FAA approved, which is an FAA accepted means of compliance developed by voluntary consensus standard bodies or other entities, or a custom one, which is an FAA accepted custom means of compliance developed independent of the FAA. And then there's more info down here. Operations over people at night. The categories and their constraints do not change due to conditions of night. Manufacturers who produce sUAS eligible to operate over people at night will most likely need to consider the mass of an anti-collision light in declaring the sUAS. Okay, that's insane. Record keeping requirements. The DOC involved certification. The DOC involves certification that the person who submits the DOC maintains a process to notify owners and the FAA of any unsafe conditions that renders the sUAS non-compliant, will correct any safety defects the FAA identifies, and will allow the FAA access to its facilities and any document records. Records related to the DOC must be maintained for a minimum of 2 years after ceasing the manufacturing of the sUAS. This is a lot for like manufacturing side of things. Product support and notification process. If the person who holds an FAA accepted DOC determines that the sUAS no longer meets the safety levels for the category declared or contains any safety defects, he or she must notify and do this stuff. The person who holds the DOC must exercise due diligence to ensure that the intended audience receive communications about potential unsafe conditions. Notifications could take several forms, including these ones right here. For category product labeling. For category 1 operations, the FAA does not require labeling. For 2 and 3, the sUAS must be labeled to indicate each eligible category. The label must be in English, legible, prominent, permanent. The category 4 operations, the sUAS must comply with labeling requirement as specified in the type certificate. If the label becomes illegible or detached, the remote PIC must relabel the aircraft before operating over people. The sUAS is modified and is no longer qualified for previously labeled category. The person who performed the modifications must remove or cover the previous label, so only the label with the newly qualified category is visible. Remote pilot operation instructions. For an sUAS that is qualified to conduct category 2 or 3 operations, the manufacturer must provide remote pilot operating instructions. The operating instructions must include general information, system limitations, including eligible categories and eligible category or categories, components required to fulfill the performance-based requirements, a statement concerning whether the sUAS can be modified, including a complete description of the modifications that do not change the eligibility category, a statement regarding whether the sUAS have variable modes or configurations, and if so, how the remote pilot can verify the changes in mode of configuration. Jesus. The FAA does not require a particular format. The manufacturer might include the operating instructions as part of the sUAS packaging electronically or by any other means. Note, Category 4 operation require an FAA-approved flight manual with operating limitations. Optional information. Although not required, the FAA encourages manufacturers to provide additional information for what... All this manufacturer stuff got me kind of bored. Although not required, the FAA encourages manufacturers to provide additional information that will assist the remote pilot in planning, conducting pre-flight checks, and making effective decisions throughout the flight. Information a manufacturer may consider providing include, but is not limited to, performance information, limitations, and operating characteristics, normal, abnormal, and emergency operating procedures, and weight and balance information. I've been waiting for one of them videos to take a break. sUAS with airworthiness certificates. For Category 4 operations, sUAS that have obtained early airworthiness certifications under 14 CFR Part 21 may operate over people or moving vehicles so long as operations are not prohibited by the airworthiness certificate or operating limits. And since I will never be under Category 4, and I hope that the test doesn't have anything in Category 4, I'm just going to let you screenshot this page if you want to study Category 4, but I'm hitting next. Open air assembly operational requirements. For Category 1, 2, or 4 operations, sustained flights over open air assemblies is restricted to sUAS that meet the requirements of Standard Remote Identification UAS or Limited Remote Identification UAS. Again, the remote ID. The remote PIC must assess whether the operational area would be considered an open air assembly prior to conducting flight operations. FAA employs a case-by-case approach to determining how to apply the term open air assembly. An open air assembly typically includes large groups of people, usually 15 to 20 people or greater, and has to do with the density of people who are not involved in the operation of the sUAS and the size of the operational area. Some potential examples of open air assemblies may include sporting events, concerts, parades, protests, political rallies, community festivals, or parks and beaches during certain events. And sustained flight over open air assemblies includes hovering overhead, flying back and forth, or circling in such a way that the sUAS remains above some part of the assembly. Legal interpretations and opinions regarding open air assemblies may be found on the FAA website. Remote piloting command responsibilities when operating over people. In addition to the other operational requirements of Part 107, a remote piloting command conducting operations over people must determine that he or she is using the right category of sUAS operation, perform all recommended pre-flight actions, including a pre-flight assessment that accounts for the additional risk inherent to operations over people, verify that the sUAS is properly labeled for Category 2 or 3, and verify that the DOC has been accepted by the FAA for Categories 2 or 3. And then there's more resources down there. Knowledge check. Holy crap. Which category of operation over people requires that the sUAS may not cause injury equivalent or greater than the impact of 11 foot-pounds of kinetic energy? I think that was Category 2. Noise. Which category of operations over people is allowed for operations conducted over a closed or restricted access site? Three was that? Shoot. See, I shouldn't have skipped those. Which category of operations over people is allowed for operations conducted over closed or restricted access sites? I think that was 3. Oh, sweating here. Which category of operations over people is limited to sUAS that weigh 55 pounds or less, including everything that is on or including everything that is on board or attached? 55 pounds or less. Wouldn't that be like 4? 55? Oh, 0.55 or less. That's Category 1. For which categories of operations is sustained flight over open air assemblies restricted to sUAS that meet remote ID requirements? Select all the apply. It's 2 and 3. Shit. 2, 3, and 4 then. What? For Category 1, 2, and 4 operations, sustained flight over open air assemblies is restricted to sUAS that meet remote ID. Oh, my brain is getting a little numb. I did not read remote ID requirements for some reason. I just read open air assemblies. Okay, so it's Category 1, 2, and 4. You guys better get that right. I got it wrong for you, so you didn't have to. Protecting non-participants though the rule allows for certain limited operations over people, don't operate over people if you don't have to. As part of pre-flight risk-based decision-making, consider the precautions below. Select an appropriate operational area for the sUAS flight. Ideally, select an operational area site that is sparsely populated. If operating in populated/inhabited areas, make a plan to keep non-participants clear, indoor, or undercover. If operating from a moving vehicle, choose a sparsely populated or unpopulated area and make a plan to keep the sUAS clear of anyone who may approach. Adopt an appropriate operating distance from non-participants. Take responsible precautions to keep the operational area free of non-participants, and ensure the sUAS will not be operated in sustained flight over any moving vehicles. Operation from moving vehicles or aircrafts. 14 CFR Part 107 permits operation of an sUAS from a moving land or waterborne vehicle over a sparsely populated or unpopulated area. However, operations from a moving aircraft is prohibited. Really? I had no clue. Additional, small unmanned aircraft that are transporting another person's property for compensation or hire may not be operated from any moving vehicle. Interesting. Transporting other person's property. You may also operate an sUAS to transport another person's property, cargo, for compensation or hire, provided you comply with the additional requirements described below. The total weight of the sUAS, including the cargo, must remain below 55 pounds. The sUAS operation must be within the boundaries of a state, which is, it cannot go over state lines. No items may be dropped from the small unmanned aircraft in a manner that creates an undue hazard to persons or property, and you may not operate the sUAS from a moving land vehicle or waterborne vessel if it's carrying other people's property, and the aircraft may not have an experimental airworthiness certificate. Part 107 restrictions on moving vehicles. Operations from moving vehicles are subject to the same restrictions that apply to all other Part 107 sUAS operations. Examples include visual line of sight, operating over people, communications, and no careless operations. If you want to read a little bit deeper, you can pause it right now. Moving vehicles, state and local traffic. Other laws such as state and local traffic laws may also apply to the conduct of a person driving a vehicle. Many states currently prohibit distracted driving, and state or local laws may also be amended in the future to impose restrictions on how cars and public roads may be used with regards to an sUAS operation. The FAA emphasizes that people involved in an sUAS operation are responsible for complying with all applicable laws and not just the FAA regulations. No operations while impaired. Part 107 does not allow operations of an sUAS if the remote pilot and command person manipulating the controls or the visual observer is unable to safely carry out his or her duties and responsibilities. While drug and alcohol use are known to impair judgment, certain over-the-counter medications and medical conditions could also affect the ability to safely operate a small unmanned aircraft. For example, certain antihistamines and decongestants may cause drowsiness. You may not directly participate in the operation of an sUAS if you know or have reason to know that you have a physical or mental condition that would interfere with the safe operation of an sUAS. Prohibit thresholds, 8 hours. Right when I was trying to get my test, I found a little like saying that said 8 hours from bottle to throttle. From bottle to throttle, 8 hours. And somehow that helped me remember that 8 hours. Part 107 prohibits a person from serving as any sUAS crew member if he or she consumed an alcoholic beverage within the preceding 8 hours, is under the influence of alcohol, has a blood alcohol concentration of 0.04 or greater, 0.04 or greater, and is using a drug that affects the person's mental or physical capabilities. Technically, you shouldn't have a 0.4 if you have already waited 8 hours. If not, then you were wasted. No, I'm just playing. No hazardous operation. No person may operate an sUAS in a careless or reckless manner so as to endanger another person's life or property. Part 107 also prohibits allowing an object to be dropped from an sUAS in a manner that creates an undue hazard for persons or property. Examples of hazardous operations include operations that interfere with manned aircraft operations and loading the sUAS beyond its capability of the point of losing control. Privacy and other considerations. Other laws, such as state and local privacy laws, may apply to sUAS operations. The remote piloting command is responsible for reviewing and complying with such laws prior to operation. In addition, the remote piloting commands are encouraged to review the Department of Commerce National Telecommunication and Information Administration, the NTIA, best practices that address privacy, transparency, and accountability issues related to private and commercial use of sUAS. Visit the resources down here if you need more info. Certificate of waiver. If the remote piloting command determines that the operation cannot be conducted within the regulatory structure of Part 107, he or she is responsible for applying for a certificate of waiver in accordance to 14 CFR 107-200 and proposing a safe alternative to the operation. Submit the application for a certificate of waiver as soon as possible before your planned operation. The FAA encourages applicants to submit applications at least 90 days. I said earlier 60. Prior to the planned use, and the FAA will strive to make a decision on waivers within 90 days. However, the time required to make a determination will vary based on the complexity of the request. The certificate of the waiver will allow an sUAS operation to deviate from certain provisions of Part 107 as long as the FAA finds that the proposed operation can be safely conducted under the terms of the certificate waiver. And then there's some more resources down here. Waivable sections of the Part 107. Your request for a waiver may be granted if the FAA finds that the proposed operation can be safely conducted under the terms of that certificate of waiver. A list of waivable sections of Part 107 can be found in 14 CFR 107-205, and they're listed below. So 107.25, I was going to skip this, but I learned my lesson here a second ago, right? 107.25, operation from a moving vehicle or aircraft. However, no waiver of this provision will be issued to allow the carriage of property of another by aircraft for compensation or hire. 107.29 A, 2, and B, anti-collision lights required for operations at night and during periods of civil twilight. Another waivable one is 107.31, which is visual line of sight aircraft operation. However, no waiver of this provision will be issued to allow the carriage of property of another by aircraft for compensation. Visual observer is also waivable. Operations of multiple small unmanned aircraft systems, like those drone shows, yielding the right of way, which I would love to know when can I waive that. Operations in certain airspaces, operating limitations for small unmanned aircraft, and operations over moving vehicles. FAA waiver review process. Submit a waiver application through the FAA Drone Zone website. An applicant must read and follow all instructions. All areas of the waiver safety explanation guidelines must be addressed and thoroughly explained in order to receive a waiver. After submitting your online applications, the FAA will determine if the proposed operation can be safely conducted under the terms of the certificate of waiver. If the application is denied, you will receive notification stating the reasons for denial. If the waiver or authorization is granted, you will receive a direct notification with the completed FAA Form 7711-1 Certificate of Waiver Authorization, dated, signed, and approved by the FAA, and specific special provisions that become regulatory for the waiver holder. Oh, snap. Another quiz. A professional wildlife photographer operates an sUAS above a moving truck to capture aerial images. From a moving truck to capture aerial images of migrating birds in remote wetlands. The driver of the truck does not serve any crew member role in the operation. That seems fine to me. Personnel at an outdoor concert venue use an sUAS to drop promotional T-shirts and CDs over an audience. Oh shit. Crap. I want to say no. I'm gonna have this wrong. Oh, this scenario is not compliant. While operating over people may be permitted in certain limited categories, you may not drop objects in a manner that creates a hazard. Okay, I just didn't know if T-shirts and CDs created a hazard, bro. It seems like it's kind of like a you make that call type of deal. This lesson examined the rules for safety operations for an sUAS. In summary, the remote piloting command and all crew members must comply with Part 107 requirements by operating at appropriate times in approved locations and in a manner that protects the safety of people, of persons, property, and the national airspace system. You should now be able to describe operational requirements and limitations for an sUAS and describe potential certificates of waiver for select requirements in Part 107. The next lesson describes common abnormal and emergency situations and defines accident reporting requirements.
The previous lesson.
Actually, so there's a 30-second video here. I'm actually going to go grab a quick drink. It might be more than 30 seconds. I apologize if I'm gone for too long. I'll be right back.
The previous lessons
I probably
in
should
this module
watch this again, but I'll be right back.
Considerations and the rules for safe operation of small unmanned aircraft systems. This lesson examines the abnormal and emergency situations that could arise during a small unmanned aircraft system operation. The lesson then defines the requirements for notifying the FAA and/or the NTSB should an accident occur involving small unmanned aircraft.
All right, so sorry, we're back. I didn't get to see the video. You did, so I have faith on you. You got this. Emergency planning and communication. In case of an in-flight emergency, the remote piloting command is permitted to deviate from any rule of Part 107 to the extent necessary to meet the emergency. Upon FAA request, you must send a written report to the FAA explaining the deviation. Become familiar with any manufacturer-suggested emergency procedures prior to the flight, review emergency actions during pre-flight planning, and inform crew members of the responsibilities. In the DJI world, all that means is just for you to be prepared for you to know what are the commands on your control to stop the drone instantly. Which usually is just kind of like you push the two joysticks in, I believe, just the same way that you start the drone. Or actually, it might be out. In mine is in, I believe. I think you can set that in the menu. But anyway, in the menu, you can set that up and just be familiar with that. That's basically what it's saying. Common abnormal and emergency situations. The remote piloting command must be prepared to respond to abnormal and emergency situations during the sUAS operation. I got the water and I never drank it. Just give me 10 seconds. Oh my goodness. Delicious. Refer to the manufacturers. Okay, so abnormal situations such as a lost link, alternate landing, recovering sites, and flight termination. And emergency situations such as a flyaway, a loss of global positioning system, and battery fires. It's I don't necessarily think that there's like an official way of dealing with this stuff, but a flyaway. Most DJIs that I've worked with and I've seen have settings where you can set what's the maximum altitude once they lose signal, and that way they'll go to that altitude and then return to home. That's what it's supposed to happen, right? If that's not happening or you're not sure if that's going to happen, it's your responsibility to find out what the heck is going to happen. lost link. Without an onboard pilot, an sUAS crew members rely on the command and control link to operate the aircraft. For example, an uplink transmits command instructions to the aircraft, and a downlink transmits the status of the aircraft and provides situational awareness to the remote pilot in command or person manipulating the controls. A lost link is an interruption of a loss of the control link between the control station and the unmanned aircraft, preventing control of the aircraft. As a result, the unmanned aircraft performs preset lost link procedures. Such procedures ensure that the unmanned aircraft remains airborne, predictable, and auto lands. That's what I was just saying. In the settings, you can set that behavior to the safest that you think your current operation should have. A lost link is an abnormal situation, but not an emergency. A lost link is not considered a flyaway, which is defined in the next section of this lesson, and that's super important. That happens to me way more than I would like it to happen. Sometimes the DJI app just crashes, and then it takes a good 15-20 seconds for it to kind of open back up and connect to the drone. And those are the longest 15 seconds of my life. And I've had it before where it said connection lost, and then it said drone collision detected, and then I had a little like video of the drone falling, even though it didn't transmit the drone falling. So again, just kind of get familiar with the emergency procedures. That's really what we need to do. Pre-flight preparations. Follow the manufacturer's recommendations for programming lost link procedures prior to the flight. Example of lost link procedures may include, when applicable, a lost link route of flight that avoids flight over populated areas and over obstacles, and communication procedures. Plan contingency measures in the event recovery of the sUAS is if... Sorry, let me read that again. Plan contingency measures in the event recovery of the sUAS is not feasible. More information about this topic is provided in the next screen. Contingency planning. Contingency planning should include an alternate landing / recovery site to be used in the event of an abnormal condition that requires a precautionary landing away from the original launch location. Incorporate the means of communication with all crew members throughout the descent and landing, as well as a plan for ground operations and securing / parking the aircraft on the ground. This includes the availability of control stations capable of launch and recovery, communication equipment, and adequate power source to operate all required equipment. Take into consideration all airspace constructs and minimize risk to other aircraft by avoiding congested areas to the maximum extent possible. Most times the whole landing thing, I think, in a more like layman's, like for like the DJI crowds type of deal, a lot of the times that is more a reactive action where, like, yes, once you get up in the air, you can kind of scan and see where, like, okay, so down there's an open field. If crap hits the fan and I need to land right now, that's a good spot. Unfortunately, when a propeller breaks or when an emergency is actually happening, rarely you have full control over it. That's why it's an emergency, right? So I think that's more of like, at the moment, right now, this is the emergency. This is the amount of control that I have. This is where I could land. That's more of what the contingency planning means with an alternate landing site. Unfortunately, that's why there's so many regulations about flying over people and flying over property, because once you lose control, it's just going to smack something or somebody. Flight termination. Flight termination is the intentional and deliberate process of performing controlled flight to the ground. Flight termination may be part of a lost link procedures, or it may be a contingency that you elect to use if further flight of the aircraft cannot be safely achieved, or if other potential hazards exist that require immediate discontinuation of the flight. Execute flight termination procedures if you have exhausted all other contingencies. Flight termination points, FTPs, if used, are alternative contingency plans measures Wait, so sorry. Sometimes I keep reading. One more time. Flight termination points, FTPs, if used, or alternative contingency planning measures should be located within power off glide distance of the aircraft during all phases of flight, be based on the assumption of an unrecoverable system failure, and take into consideration altitude, winds, and other factors. Flyaway. A flyaway is an emergency situation that may begin as a lost link. An interruption or loss of the control links prevents control of the aircraft. During a flyaway, the preset lost link procedures are not established or are not executed by the unmanned aircraft, preventing the aircraft from operating in a predictable or planned manner. In a flyaway, if a flyaway occurs while operating in airspace that requires authorization, notify ATC as outlined in the certificate of waiver or authorization. Title 49, Part 830 requires immediate notification of the National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, of any aircraft flight control system malfunction. A flyaway would qualify as a flight control malfunction reportable to the NTSB. A lost link event would not be reportable to the NTSB since the UAS is behaving in a predictable manner. That's really the main difference between a lost link and a flyaway. The lost link, the drone is executing that return to home on its own. The flyaway, it's already 6 states down. And then there's some resources down here. Global loss of GPS. Global positioning system tools can be valuable resource for flight planning and situational awareness during an sUAS operation. However, as with manned aviation, remote piloting command in sUAS operations should avoid over-reliance on automation and should be prepared to operate the unmanned aircraft manually if needed. Prior to flight, check NOTAMs for any known GPS service disruptions in planned locations of the sUAS operation. Make a plan of action to prevent or minimize damage in the event of equipment malfunction or failure. And there's some resources down here. A quick, very easy, recognizable event for this is the Northern Lights. If you live in like the Northern Hemisphere and you hear a lot about these like geomagnetic storms and all that stuff, that usually wrecks GPS and drones. Risk of battery fires. Battery fires pose a significant hazard to an sUAS. Both lithium metal and lithium ion batteries are highly flammable, capable of self-igniting when a battery short circuits or is overcharged, heated to extreme temperatures, mishandled, or otherwise defective, and subject to a thermal runaway. During thermal runaway, a lithium metal batteries generate sufficient heat to cause adjacent cells to go into a thermal runaway. As a result, the lithium metal cells releases an explosive combination of flammable electrolytes and molten lithium metal, accompanied by a large pressure pulse, aka a molten metal explosion. Prevent fire batteries storage. Ensure careful storage of spare uninstalled lithium batteries. Take the following precautions to prevent a battery fire. Prevent short circuits by placing each individual battery in the original retail packaging, a separate plastic bag, or a protective pouch, or by insulating exposed terminals with tape. Do not allow spare batteries to come in contact with metal objects such as coins, keys, or jewelry, and take steps to prevent objects from crushing, puncturing, or applying pressure on the battery. Some people use ammo boxes for storage of LiPo batteries. Technically, those are metal, but then they say that they kind of delay the fire, so it's your call. Pre-flight. When preparing to conduct sUAS operations, do not use any battery with signs of damage or defect. For example, check carefully for small nicks in the battery casing and be alert for signs of bubbling or warping during charging. Once the battery is installed and the sUAS takes flights, the remote piloting command or ground crew may not observe a battery fire until it's too late to land the aircraft safely. If a battery fire occurs, follow manufacturer guidance. Accident reporting to the FAA. The remote piloting command must report any sUAS accident to the FAA within 10 calendar days after operation if any of the following thresholds are made. If there's a serious injury to any person or loss of consciousness, and if damage to property other than small unmanned aircraft, if the cost is greater than $500 to repair or replace. And there's some more information there. Reporting FAA reporting serious injury examples. Serious injury example: a person requires hospitalization, but the injury can fully heal, including but not limited to loss of consciousness, head trauma, broken bones, or lacerations to the skins that require stitches. So as long as you're not breaking a bone, doing a concussion, knocking somebody out of consciousness, or creating a wound that requires stitches, you're kind of fine. I'm not a lawyer. FAA reporting, required information. If the accident meets the previously described threshold, report the following key information to the FAA. So this is here what you need to report. So the remote piloting command information, like the name, the contact info, your certificate number, the aircraft information, like the registration number, and the accident information, like where it happened, when it happened, the local time, was there a serious injury or fatality, was there property damage, just describe what happened. Oh, wait. In addition to the FAA report and in accordance with the criteria established by the NTSB, certain sUAS accidents must also be reported immediately to the NTSB. The NTSB has different accident reporting requirements that apply to all aircraft, including UAS. These reports must be made immediately versus the 10 days allowed for FAA reporting on the 107. Notify NTSB immediately if an accident occurs in which a person suffers death or serious injury, or the aircraft has a maximum gross takeoff weight of 300 pounds or greater and sustains substantial damage. Technically, no sUAS under any of these regulations should be over 55 pounds, right? C49 CFR 834 specific definitions for serious injuries and substantial damage. And then there's some resources here to review: the NTSB advisory and part 830. During your pre-flight inspection, you discover a small nick in the casing of your sUAS battery. What action should you take? Throw it away with your household trash. Use it as long as it will hold charge. Follow the manufacturer's guidance. I'm going to go with the safe one, the guidance. You are part of a news crew operating an sUAS to cover a breaking story. You experience a flyaway during landing. The unmanned aircraft strikes a vehicle, causing approximately $800 worth of damage. When must you report the accident to the FAA? Within 10 days. This lesson examined abnormal and emergency sUAS situations and accident reporting requirements. In summary, the remote piloting command must take swift and appropriate actions to avoid hazards and respond to equipment malfunction or failure. Should these response effort fail, result in serious injury or damages, the remote piloting command must report the accident to the FAA within 10 calendar days. You should now be able to identify common abnormal emergent situations during an sUAS operation and identify requirements for reporting sUAS accidents. Holy crap. All right, receiving training credit. When you exit this part of the training, you will be taken back to the FAA safety team website to access, reference, a glossary, a review, and the required online end of training knowledge check. To receive credit for the online training, you must take the final course exam. How much have we been streaming? Sorry, you guys are going to see my streaming software because I'm just capturing my screen. We've been for that's not that bad. It feels like we were here for 4 hours so far, but we are 2 hours in, 2 hours and 15, a little more than that. I think I'm ready for the exam. I think Oh Lord. Um, please hold. I have to put some sensitive information here. I'm still here. I'm just logging in here real quick. I think that is it. Okay, okay. Holy crap, this already looks spicy. Alright, so we're back on track here and back on here. Alright, so how many questions is this? Oh my god. 45 questions, okay? Am I doing this on stream? Am I doing this right now? Yeah, I guess so. Okay. All right, so part 107, small UAS recurrent exam. Enrolled, okay. Welcome to the exam for part 107, small UAS recurrent. You must complete the entire exam in one session. If the exam is not completed and graded in 90 minutes or less, you will need to retake the entire exam when you log into the course again. You may review course material as you take the test. Many questions have reference links available. A separate window will open. Close that window when ready to continue this exam. When complete, press the grade exam button at the bottom. If you get wrong answers, you will be brought back to the exam with the incorrect answers marked. You must get 100% to pass the exam. Holy tits! All right, let's go. Question number 1. After receiving a Part 107 remote pilot certificate with an sUAS rating, how often must you satisfy recurrent training requirements? Fairly sure that's 24 months. They should have just made it so that each question you can just like verify, because I have so much anxiety about it now. According to 14 CFR 107, an sUAS is an unmanned aircraft system weighing less than 55 pounds. Unmanned aircraft means an aircraft operated autonomously by onboard computers without the possibility of direct human intervention from within or on the aircraft, and during search and rescue is the second one. Which of the following types of operations are excluded from the requirements in Part 107? UAS used for motion picture filming, quadcopter capturing aerial imaging for crop monitoring, recreational use of sUAS for operations enjoyment. Is that third one? Which of the following operations require adherence to 14107? Flying an sUAS for enjoyment? Nope. Operations conducted outside of the United States? Nope. Operating an sUAS for compensation? Yes. According to 14 CFR Part 48, when would a small unmanned aircraft owner not be permitted to register it? All persons are eligible to register a small unmanned aircraft if the owner is less than 13 years of age, if the owner does not have a valid... shit. Well, not having a U.S. valid driver's license doesn't mean that you're foreign. So I think if the owner is less than 13 years of age, right? When would a small aircraft not be permitted? Yeah, so I'm pretty sure if it's less than 13. Which of the following statements is true about small unmanned aircraft registration with the FAA before operation in the National Airspace System? Which of the following statements is true about small unmanned aircraft registration with the FAA? Only unmanned aircraft that weigh 55 pounds or more must be registered. A small unmanned aircraft operating under Part 107 must be registered. Small unmanned aircraft do not require registration. The second one sounds the least crazy. When using a small unmanned aircraft in a non-recreational operation, who is responsible for informing the participants about emergency procedures? The remote pilot in command. The FAA inspector in charge. A person without a Part 107 remote pilot certificate may operate an sUAS for non-recreational operations under the direct supervision of a remote pilot in command. Only visual observers depend on loan. Okay, it's definitely the first one. A person whose sole task is watching the sUAS to report hazards to the rest of the queue is called a virtual observer. The effective use of all available resources, human, hardware, information, prior to and during flight to ensure successful outcome of the operation is called cruise resource management, is it? Oh, shoot. Or safety management system. I think it's crew resource management. Shoot. Why am I not 100% on that one? Why do I also think that it's safety management system? The effective use of all available resources, human, hardware, and information prior to and during flight. It has to be crew management. When adapting crew resource management concepts to the operation of a small unmanned aircraft, CRM must be integrated into all phases of the operation. That sounds like the least crazy one. You have been hired as a remote pilot in command by a local TV news station to film breaking news with a small unmanned aircraft. You expressed a safety concern, and the station manager has instructed you to hurry up and get it done. What type of hazardous attitude does this attitude represent? Impulsivity. Under what conditions should the remote pilot in command of a small unmanned aircraft develop his or her own scheduled maintenance protocol when the manufacturer doesn't provide one? When the FAA requires to small unmanned... No, the first one. Scheduled maintenance should be performed in accordance with the manufacturer's recommendations. As part of overall safety risk assessment for flight, when should the remote pilot in command check and consider weather considerations in the operating area? Prior to and throughout the duration of every small UAS flight, only when planning an operation with unfamiliar small, never. The first one. While operating around buildings, the remote pilot in command should be aware of the creation of wind gusts that change rapidly in direction and speed, causing turbulence, enhance stability and imagery, increases performance of the aircraft. The first one for sure. Part 89 remote ID requirements apply to all unmanned aircraft operating under 107. True. Only apply to unmanned aircraft that weigh less than 0.55. Not true. Do not apply. Okay, so definitely the first one. A small unmanned aircraft without remote ID that is equipped after production with a remote ID broadcast module may only operate at FAA recognized. May only operate in the national airspace system. It's limited to visual line of sight operations. May not be operated. Oh, so it's three. It's the third one. A person may not use a remote ID broadcast module that relies solely on software upgrades to existing hardware on the UA, fails the self-test when powered, is installed by anyone other than the UA manufacturer. According to 14 CFR Part 107, the responsibility to inspect the small unmanned aircraft system, sUAS, to ensure it is in safe operating condition rests with the remote pilot in command. Before each flight, the remote pilot in command must ensure that the site supervisor has approved the flight, TSA has granted clearance, objects carried on the sUAS are secured. Bro, why you do this to me, dude? I think it's three. The site supervisor. Why the hell? No, it has to be three. According to 14 CFR Part 107, who is responsible for ensuring that all control links between the ground control station and the small unmanned aircraft are working properly? The remote pilot in command? I think so. According to 14 again 107, what is required to operate a small unmanned aircraft in civil twilight or at night? The use of lighted anti-collision lights, selection of a rural area for conducting the operations, use of transponder. Definitely the first one. When conducting operations during civil twilight or at night, the small unmanned aircraft must be equipped with anti-collision lights that are capable of being visible for at least 3 statute miles. When does a remote piloting command operating at night have the discretion to reduce the intensity at a collision and the anti-collision lighting? I got that one wrong earlier. It was only in the interest of operational safety. To keep the small unmanned aircraft in the intended area and within visual line of sight during night operations, the remote piloting command is required to designate 2 visual observers, may rely solely on anti-collision lights, should reduce operational ranges. That's number 3 for sure. During night operations, compensate for the night blind spot by looking 5 to 10. Okay. If the remote pilot in command cannot determine the location of the sUAS in relation to another aircraft during night operations, when should he or she land the UAS? Immediately, I would say. As landing an sUAS at night is particularly challenging. Select a landing area over water, sand, or other soft surfaces that is far from crew members as possible, with sufficient lighting to allow a safe landing. Holy tits! This is definitely either 2 or 3. 3. According to Part 107, how may a remote piloting command operate an unmanned aircraft in controlled airspace, Class B, C, or D, and E, associated with the airport? The remote PIC must monitor the ATC frequency from launch to recovery. Remote PIC must have prior authorization from ATC, and remote PIC must contact the ATC facility after launching. So it's definitely number 2. Without prior ATC authorization, you can fly your sUAS below 400 feet above ground level and with at least 1 designated visual flyer in an uncontrolled airspace on private property. Without prior ATC authorization, you can fly your sUAS below 400 feet above ground level. Well, I mean, like, without ATC authorization, you can, in an uncontrolled airspace. That's the only thing that makes sense to me. To conduct Category 1 operations over people, the small unmanned aircraft must weigh 55 pounds or less, including everything on board, must be labeled to indicate the eligible category, must be listed in the FAA-approved declaration of It's actually the number 1 for Category 1. For Category 2 operations over people, the small unmanned aircraft must not contain any exposed rotating parts that could lacerate human skin, must be equipped with a siren, or may only be operated in a closed... Okay, so it's definitely number 1. For Category 3 operations over people, the small unmanned aircraft must not cause injury equivalent or greater than the impact of... That was 25 for Category 3A. Category 4 operations are limited to unmanned aircraft registered outside the United States, operated beyond visual line of sight with FAA. Yeah, it's the third one, the airworthiness certificate. For Categories 1, 2, and 4, operations over people, sustained flight over open air assemblies are restricted to small unmanned aircraft that meet part... Yes, I got this one wrong earlier. Weigh more than 55 or are operated free as known. So it's definitely the first one. Almost done. In accordance to 107, you may operate an sUAS from a moving vehicle when no property is carried for compensation or hire, over a parade or social events, over suburban areas, over a sparsely populated. Definitely number 3. In accordance to 107, except when within 400 feet radius of a structure, at what maximum altitude can you operate an sUAS? At 400 feet above ground level. The FAA may approve your application for waiver of provisions in Part 107 only when it has been determined that the proposed operation will be conducted outside the United States, involve public aircraft or air carrier operations, can be safely conducted under the terms. Definitely number 3 on that one. When requesting a waiver, the required documents should be presented to the FAA at least how many calendar days prior to the planned operations? 90 days, we learned that one. Damaged lithium batteries can cause increased endurance, a change in aircraft center of gravity, in-flight fire. Definitely number 3. While operating a small unmanned aircraft system, you experience a flyaway, and several people suffer injuries. Which of the following injuries requires reporting to the FAA? So there's an injury requiring hospitalization, scrapes and cuts, bandages on site, and minor bruises. Definitely number 1 on that one. Within how many calendar days must an sUAS accident be reported to the FAA? That's 10 days. And remember, it's 10 days for FAA, but it's immediately for the NTSB if it applies. And to avoid a possible collision with a manned airplane, you climb your unmanned aircraft to yield the right of way. In doing so, your unmanned aircraft reach an altitude greater than 600 feet AGL. To whom must you report the deviation upon request? Upon request to the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration. All right, so there's like 2 of them that I wasn't sure. But fuck it, let's click it. Let's go. Let's see. 2, I think 2 wrong. 2 wrong. Let's go. Click right now. Oh, 100%, boy. Awesome. Congratulations. You have successfully passed the exam. Your exam score is 100%. Please take a moment to provide feedback. Did you find the course informative? Somewhat. There are some things that I learned. Was the course easy to understand? Sure. Some things there were weird. How was the length of the course? Buddy, that was long. Would you recommend this course to others? I mean, this is not a recommend thing. People either need to take this or not. So, might recommend it. And comments, thank you, mate. Thanks you, not thanks you. Thank you. Send feedback. Boom. And there you have it, guys. So sorry that it took it was this long, but I hope that you guys saw the experience. So for me, that I was streaming and I was talking and I was explaining things, it was about 2.5 hours. Switching here real quick. Yeah, exactly 2.5 hours. But if you guys are focused, laser focused, probably 30 minutes to an hour, this is just cake. Now, granted, I work daily doing this. So if you guys want to see some of my work, feel free to subscribe and hit the like, hit the bell. If you know people that are about to need this information, their license is expiring, they've never taken the license, they just want to dip their feet, this is definitely much lighter than the main exam. So this is actually a pretty good overview for people that want to know about this stuff, because this had nothing about weather, and my real exam had at least 10 really good questions about weather. So anyway, I appreciate you. Thank you for being there. I'm ending here the video for the guide, and then I'm jumping in World of Warcraft on my Twitch just for, a dungeon or 2. But I appreciate you. Thank you so much. Let me know in the comments what questions you have. What can I help with? I'm a nerd with cameras and drones, and if I don't know it, I can find the answer. But thank you. Thank you for being there.